Thank you very much for inviting me today. It's really inviting Cassis to be here. It's a great opportunity. I'm really pleased to meet everyone, and hopefully we'll meet again someday. I will give you a couple of things. If you want to take any notes, you can just use this little piece of paper. I won't pass this around, but this is a little brochure about our center that you can have and pass around, and I'll just leave my business cards here too. So. I understand you want me to speak for like 15 minutes or no more, and then we could have question and answer. So I'll just be kind of surfing across the top of this issue. As I understand it, you want to have a discussion about sustainable food systems and what that actually means and how you might apply it to your grant-making program. Sometimes at the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems, CASFAS, I won't make you say that 10 times real fast because it's not easy. But we refer to the food system as the agri-food system. That you'll see that name in there, that term in there, sometimes because then you're talking about the whole, production system, and then the distribution system, and the consumption system, the political system, with agriculture and food, just to forcefully make that connection that yes, food is connected to agriculture, along the way. But just about 2 minutes or 1 minute on who we actually are. At the center. We are part of the University of California, Santa Cruz. We're in the Division of Social Sciences, which is the biggest division at the University at UCSC. And it's unusual, actually, in the United States for an organization like ours, or a research institute is what we are. We're a research unit, to be located in a social science division. I mean, often at these ag colleges, you see anything related to agriculture in its own College of Agriculture and Natural Resources or something like that. So, but we see it as an advantage because, as you'll see as I move on here. But the UC mission is research, education, and public service, and I'll just give you these are just snapshots. We do a lot more than this, but in the area of research, for example, Patricia Allen, our director, is working on gender and labor in the agri-food system right now. She has a National Science Foundation grant actually to do that. We've been working for a long time on biological control of fruit and vegetable pests, organic controls on real farms and on our own farm, which is 25 acres at the campus. We also do education. We have the almost 45-year-old apprenticeship in ecological horticulture, which is a 6-month program, and we also have a 12-month portion of that, but more than 1,400 people have gone through that program over the years and have gone on to really great things. Working in sustainable agriculture and ecological horticulture. We do this thing called Food Learning Journeys and Garden Cruise, which is really intended for UCSC students, enrolled students, and opportunities for them to see different aspects of the food system and experience it hands-on and ask questions about it and be involved that way. We also do public service. Right now we're involved in a partnership with the Central Coast School Food Alliance, which is really working to try to get fresh and nutritious food into the public school system. And we always have our campus organic farm events and tours, and I'm inviting you right now to come anytime you'd like to visit our farm, and I'll take you around and show you what we're doing there. It's a really fun place to visit.
Cool. Beautiful ocean view.
Yeah, it's about a $50 million view. Actually. But if you look at, this is just, there's hundreds of these kinds of schematics about what the food system or agri-food system actually is. This is just to show and to illustrate that it's not just one thing. It involves everything from farming to consumption and the political system and all the impacts that occur along the way. So let me just say a few things about how we got here from there in terms of talking about sustainability in the agri-food system. In 1979, this kind of precipitated this whole move. In 1979, the USDA published they produced a report on their first report on organic farming in the U.S. and that was published, I think, a couple years later. It wasn't published for a couple of years after it was actually produced. But that provoked a lot of discussion because it basically said that organic farming really can be a viable system of production. And so there was a lot of scurrying back and forth about that. Ultimately, the organic people were saying this is the way we're doing things now is just not sustainable. And that's kind of how the word got into the lexicon, that we can't keep doing it this way, mostly on the basis of issues having to do with energy use and production of nitrogen fertilizer, and then and some of the environmental impacts having to do, for example, with runoff or pollution of groundwater due to overuse of nitrogen fertilizers, and all the petrochemicals that were being used to produce chemical pesticides and fertilizers. So basically, the organic people were saying, and the environmental people were saying, this is not sustainable. And so it's kind of an overstatement to say that sustainable became a proxy for organic, because throughout the 80s there were a lot of folks working on low input sustainable agriculture. In other words, maybe we won't eliminate the synthetic inputs, but let's optimize and minimize them as much as possible. And the whole 80s had to do with energy use, and so that became kind of the word sustainable was a big tent type of issue where everybody who was interested in this issue, including organic people, could at least have a common platform to talk about some of the issues here. But anyway, when it first started in the 80s, sustainable agriculture really had a big focus on biological process and farm level production. As we moved forward and kept talking about these things into the 90s, the importance of social structures and production, distribution, and consumption became more important, and this 3 E's thing kind of is still around: environment, economics, and equity. And folded into the economics and the environment was, again, the energy issue, and it still is an issue. Inputs and outputs. When we're talking about sustainability, we're always talking about how long can this last, and it's really kind of it's not a question you can answer right now. It's an ongoing discussion. But anyway, in the 90s and into the 21st century, all of a sudden social issues, including economics, became part of the discussion. So now we're talking about biological and social issues at the same time, which is really good. Now in the 21st century, we're starting to get to the point where we're talking still about biological issues and social issues, but now it's become a little bit more personal. We're talking about how can we make our food system, our agri-food system, good for everybody. Kind of a little irony there, but this is what we're talking about. And what's its impact on human health and the quality of life for everybody? Not just people who can afford, the best food, but everybody. So really, every time we talk about sustainability, it's about the future. Even though we're living in the present, we're always sustainable by definition. It means how long can this last, or we have to make it last. So we're really talking about the future here, as well as what we're doing right now. And the question is, what kind of agri-food system do we really want? Patricia Allen, who's our director, wrote this really great book, and I'm recommending it. That's why I put it up there. This is called Together at the Table. She wrote it in 2004, and it's really it's an overview of the alternative agriculture movement in the United States in the past 30, 40 years, and all the structural issues involved in the progression of the movement. And the reason I'm recommending it to you is because it's incredibly informative. If you really want to inform yourself about the last 30, 40 years in sustainable agriculture, especially in the U.S., it's a really good book to read. There's this one quote she has: narrow dominant ideas and practices were once emergent, but not all emergent ideas and practices have become dominant. So the idea, for example, of organic farming was an emergent idea. Sustainable agriculture was an emergent idea. As we move forward, it's becoming especially sustainable agriculture, the dominant idea. And it's moved into other areas like construction and almost every aspect of our life, where you hear the word sustainable all the time. And the question then always comes back to, can we sustain what we're doing right now? But where's the movement headed right now? The movement is really, I'll never use that background again. But anyway, so social issue, what are we trying to do in the movement? We're trying to expand participation. So it's a little bit schmaltzy, I guess, to say, okay, here's 3 more E's to think about. But they're also useful to think about when we're talking about if a program or a project or an organization or any kind of activity related to agriculture and the food system has these other 3 E's one way or another. We're now talking more about our food workers' wages and working conditions, especially women in those positions, exclusion, and this has to do with food security. Is good, healthy, nutritious food available in lower income neighborhoods, for example? And not only is it available, but is it affordable? Can people actually buy it? So that's really a food security issue. And then education, in other words, information about these dominant and emergent ideas and practices in the food system, and what people need to know to be able to take part in the conversation. So if we, let's say you, I noticed that you're pretty far down the road in terms of your selection criteria about what you're going to fund, but there's a lot of overlap in what is up on the screen right now and what you've already figured out. So you can use it in any way you want, and that's a lot of ease to keep track of. But we're really talking about environmental health, economic conditions, equity and benefits, who benefits, exploitation, wages. There's a lot of people working in the kitchens of the restaurants and the cafeterias around the world who put in long days and work really hard. And who's excluded? Is this for everybody? And how can we educate people? So if CASPAS, for example, we do have a grant program, but if we were doing specifically for this, these are some of the criteria we keep in mind in terms of any particular program or project. Does it do this? Does it do that? The extent to which it does any of those or has an impact on any of those issues, those 6 E's up there is what I would ask. So that's all I got to say, and just to maybe provoke some discussion, and I'll take your questions and we can talk a little bit.
Great.
Thanks, Jonathan. That is a really great overview. A lot of our conversations early on, we were trying to think about how to format, how to think about the general, how we frame sustainability. What does it mean, first off? And specifically, what does it mean in this arena? So that's really helpful in shedding some light and getting back into some of the history. As far as moving forward, as far as some of the things that are kind of on the brink, whether it's a technology or an application or a specific group or a functional area that you see as being really important, can you shed some light on that at all? Or?
Well, from our perspective, the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems right now, if I could pick just a term to reflect what our focus is, it's really about social justice. And you hear that term a lot these days. It's kind of attached to, liberal thinking in the political realm. But really, for us, it's about things, things that have to do with food and livelihood security. So, do people have jobs? Can we create jobs? What can we do in the whole realm of the agri-food system to create jobs that that offer affordable living wages, that also help create conditions by which anybody can purchase nutritious, fresh food at a price they can afford. So any groups or projects from our perspective that work either directly or indirectly in that realm is really worth considering.
Well, it's interesting because I know I did a little bit of background research on Patricia Allen and kind of what the center's doing. One of the things that it struck me, and I'm always thinking, well, local is better, but it seems that one of the things that you folks are really working on is finding the line between achieving a balance of all the E's here, but not necessarily making it mutually exclusive of local only. Some people just don't have that option. But it comes down to the price, comes down to people need jobs, for the transportation factors, everything like that.
Right. Basically, we all have to eat, Right. So there's all ways of approaching that. There's no one panacea for how we get food and livelihood security for everybody. Local food is a really good thing. It's not a panacea. There's issues with it. There's obviously, people in Kansas City aren't going to be eating any more fish, or at least ocean fish, if everything is bought local. There's a quality of life issue. There's always a tendency to present an extreme position, and then society as a whole looks at the extreme positions and kind of backs it off to a middle ground. I mean, there's any combination of local, international, or national that at least addresses some of the issues that are inherent in sustainability are worth considering. So I think that to accept anything as the best possible way of doing things without really looking at it closely and analyzing all components of it is just cheating yourself. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, that's a great sound.
Long-winded.
Else, yeah.
Yes.
Well, you've mentioned all these various E things,
Right.
and at the risk of making a pun, I'm wondering which are the greatest of E's that you would recommend that we might want to focus on for the greatest leverage.
This is my personal opinion. There's a really interesting discussion in here, by the way, about the environment and how the environment itself is kind of a social or human construct, and so it's the environment is everything we make it out to be. Basically, is what that's saying. But for me, it really comes down to economics. I think that's like the real. It covers a lot of ground. It covers issues having to do with jobs, and having livelihood and food security, as I said, whether you can afford it or not. But there's not. We shouldn't dismiss any of them. But if I had to start somewhere, it would be if I would have to start somewhere, and I'm not even an economist. I would start with looking at the economic situation, writ large. All aspects of economics as it impacts communities and individuals working or living in a food system.
As far as the economics of it are concerned, looking at kind of the shape of and how that's all dictated, and you look at 2012 and the Farm Bill cycle, I mean, that dictates a lot of how the economics in the sustainable food system and the food system in general are divvied out and what really gets focused on. That policy level is, I think, a little bit beyond what we want to focus on, and probably a little bit politically charged for something we want to really delve into. So as far as kind of the microeconomics of it, what do you see as kind of getting in a little bit further there?
Again, I come back to how can you create employment opportunities through the agri-food system, and opportunities that might have to do, for example, with a business that itself strives for sustainability in the way they operate their practices and their policies. Just this morning, I opened up a new tube of toothpaste, and it was a toothpaste that's kind of an alternative toothpaste. It's been around for a long time, but on the package it says something like one of our business priorities is we put a priority on sustainable practices, but it's not explained exactly what that is. It's kind of a nice little slogan. But if you look further into what any company or business is trying to do and the practices that they use, including things like wages, including things like their impact on the environment, that to me is a really good place to look. If you're thinking about supporting activities that bring the opportunities for better food and livelihood security to a community, I think that's the place to begin.
One of the things that a company might do to move further along this path are things that they would probably want to do anyway if they could. If they improve food quality and get better prices for it, and streamline costs, reduce costs, and better profit, and so on.
Right.
Other things, as with lots of stuff in the environmental area, that there isn't really an incentive for other externalities and kind of difficult. So, what kind of role do you see policy play?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Policy is in some ways, it's like ecology or an ecological principle, because what you're trying to do, what I think you would try to do with a particular policy, is to create a condition, an operating condition, by which a business, for example, can make a decision that would lend itself toward better sustainability, rather than to make a mandate or a dictate about what a company ought to do. So let's just take the Farm Bill as policy. One of the things in the Farm Bill is that there's heavy subsidies on the commodity crops, corn, soybeans, wheat, rice, and cotton. I think are the big five, but there's not very much in there for fresh fruit and vegetables. So it becomes an issue of, okay, if we're going to have these subsidies, what kind of conditions can we create so that it's actually both better for fruits and vegetable farmers, but also better for people because they'll be eating those fruits and vegetables. So that's just a real obvious example of creating those conditions.
Sometimes in terms of economic incentives, we get to perverse situations. So, for example, there was a piece on I think it was on KQED's Best or something like that recently, where they talked about how some dairy farmers who got ahead of the curve and decided to put in methane digesters.
Mm-hmm.
But now the California Air Resources Board is beating them up because those produce pollution. Other times they reduce greenhouse gas pollution, but they produce smog and smog-forming pollutants instead, and they basically said put on this large expense that will reduce that pollution. Mm-hmm. And in some sense, so they were looking at cost purposes there, and so that's actually discouraging other dairy farmers from doing the same thing. It seems to me that the original purpose of having these farm subsidies is because crops fluctuate in price. Mm-hmm. And originally it was done as some sort of price support and getting people not to grow crops so they wouldn't overspend the price support. Mm-hmm. But it seems that we've had a long-term trend, especially over the last 40, 50 years, of going from family-oriented farms to more mechanized farms. And in some sense, organic and sustainable agriculture goes the other way. Mm-hmm. So what I'm wondering is the extent that we can create economic security for small family farms. Because essentially when there are price fluctuations, when there are economic adjustments, when there's bad weather, then these family farms have very little resilience financially, mm-hmm. economically, and they fail very quickly, and then their land is bought up or not by large factory farms. So it basically is a sort of a one-way street in that direction. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering to follow up on what Gary was talking about, the idea of moving towards providing more economic security through some national, like this, for example, I'm a beneficiary, so to speak, for the National Flood Insurance Program because I live in a floodplain, mm-hmm. and you can't get commercial insurance. To what extent might there be insurance provisions for small farmers, so that in case of weather fluctuations or market fluctuations, they can still make a living and promote their sustainability?
That's a good question, and there has been quite a bit of movement in that direction in the past 10 years of trying to provide incentives for farmers of any scale, but in particular small and medium scale, to move toward crop insurance purchases rather than relying on subsidies. But I'm not an expert on it. But just to let you know, that at the level of USDA, there has been quite a bit of funding, in fact, to beef up crop insurance programs, so to minimize the risk.
Right.
A steep drop in a price for a particular commodity would have on a family farm, but also to or in the case of a disaster, like
right, or flooding, or
yeah. Yeah, so you just be happy. Well, not being you'd be happy to know that there is a lot of movement toward that. More, it would still be there'd still be some kind of a federal guarantee, back for these crop insurance programs, but there is movement toward that.
Especially if you can broaden the number beyond these 5
right
crops.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jonathan. That provides a lot of insight for us, and quite literally food for thought. And thanks so much for taking your time. We're at the stage now where we need to transition into some of the other issues that Susan would like to cover, and started a broader discussion about some of the or more finite discussion about some of the organizations. So thank you so much for your time.
You're
and,
welcome.
a quick round of applause.
You'll have my cards. You can
Yeah.
call me anytime.
Thank you.
I want you to see this model too, if you have a second. Are
Okay.
you able
I'm
to
staying
see
here.
it?
Oh, but feel free, yeah, I hope you can
Well,
stay.
I brought a couple things for you. One, it's a model, a community guide model, social justice model from the Centers of Disease Control. For you all to look at, and I wasn't sure how many people you had, but Jonathan, I can show this one. I think I can do it. I'm going to send these that way, and then you can pass them around. And I'll share this one. Okay. So, a couple things. One is this helps you place social justice in with some of the variables that we're talking about. And this is a model that looks at community health and food and agriculture and resources and jobs and social equity are all taken into account here. And the reason, so this actually, the model itself is on page 14. So if you turn to the second page of the paper here, you'll see what I'm talking about. And then what they do is they take all of these different variables about for a healthy community and operationalize these in different outcomes in the following parts of the paper. So this hopefully will give you some idea when you come to looking at increasing or making neighborhoods, building, improving, retaining neighborhood assets, enhancing neighborhood cohesion. But you get down to page 16, and you see they have developing employment opportunities, which in the area of agriculture, all these different kinds of variables that will give you kind of a framework to begin to think about some of the projects you want to look at and maybe some of the issues that you're interested in. So I brought this to try to help you begin sort of more systematically look at these variables that take into account healthy communities and social justice. And the other thing that's really nice about this wonderful paper written by anthropologists and health care people, they actually got together on these issues. And my PhD is in social science and social equity. There is a website through the Centers for Disease Control where they look at all the research on these different variables and cite the best practices. And so I'll leave a copy for the person who wants to go to that website and look at this, but I did look today, and it's called the Community Guide, What Works to Promote Health. And there is a section on communities should provide incentives for production, distribution, and procurement of foods from local farms. And they look here at all the research that's been done in this particular area. And they cite a couple papers, but the evidence really shows that dispersing agricultural production in local areas around the country would increase the amount of produce that could be grown and made available to local consumers. And although no evidence has been published to link local food production and health outcomes, a study has been funded to explore the potential nutritional and health benefits of eating locally grown foods. This shows you right here the evidence that this is just as Jonathan is saying, and that's why I'm so happy that you're taking up this topic, because if you have been doing it for years, you might have got to do it some day like I worked with the South Jamota, did I mention that to you? And this early sustainable ag people when I was an undergrad. So for 30 years, I've kind of watched this movement grow, and the synergy and all everything that's coming together now is wonderful. You can look at what Jonathan's doing, and you see some of those same things picked up in this model by the health folks, looking across with the people in social science, and look at this, go to this website and see the best practices. So that might help guide you.
So that research is at the CDC website?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so if
And
I could
you're the
take
one
that,
who
I'll
gets
put it
this.
on our website. Yeah,
Okay, good.
thank you.
And the paper, too. And there's also a whole another paper on the methods for setting up the website. So this is a very carefully thought out website and guide for people working in the community, how to cross those disciplines out. So that's sort of state of the art, one thing you might look at. The other thing I wanted to mention, and you want to take it?
Sure.
Take that, yeah. And I was just looking at a group, evaluating a group that it's called NEFA now, Martin Luther King Agricultural Food and Research Institute. So USDA is moving more towards an institute model similar to the National Institute for Health. So I've been reviewing grants for them, and most of the agencies do use something called the A logic model, I don't know if you're familiar with that, but here's the model. The first, and I'll give them to you to look at. The first one is a generic model for the logic approach. And what it does is it takes into account, it makes the agent theory be very specific about situation, inputs, activities, outputs. And then most importantly now, when we're looking at who's funded, who's evaluated, or we put in a grant at Cooperative Extension, what are your outcomes? You have short, intermediate, and long term. So your evaluation component, whatever you're working with, becomes very, very important. And what we have to do now, and even when I do my annual evaluations for promotion, I look at impact outcomes. So there's evaluation that's impact. So I can't just educate somebody. I want to change their behavior. And eventually I want to be able to go back and see how many people went to my class and then followed through and did what you asked them to do, what you're trying to educate them on. So here are some of these models for you to look at just as samples. The first one is a generic National Institute of Food and Ag logic model. The other is one that we used recently for a combined 4-H youth nutrition. And the last one I just got is interesting that Michigan Community to Reduce Hunger Policies, Partnerships, and Practices logic model. And this model has been around forever, but everybody, and I actually attended a conference of nonprofits in San Francisco the end of August. And the speakers, and this is 1,000 people, I think, all the nonprofits in the Bay Area, they're still using logic models. Because it makes people look at the inputs, the outputs, the resources. They really have to, whoever you're working with, and I know one of your goals is to participate with them, to build their capacity and help them take whatever it is that they're doing and make it have maybe a bigger purpose and a bigger application. And so it really makes them be very clear about what the resources are, what the external factors working for and against them, the internal factors working for and against them. So it's just a nice systematic framework, once again, for people to approach whatever topic it is that you have you want them to be looking at. But another thing there is sometimes these are SMART objectives, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time specific. But I think it's really more than the evaluation of the outcomes that we're looking at so carefully now, because that's how people get you funded. Or you need to prove that you do what you say you do, what you intended to do, right? So that actually, I think is saying very little, gives you a lot to think about.
Yeah.
So if that provides also some thought building on what Jonathon had said, maybe I can help you go through some of these variables or make further suggestions. I'm happy to talk about the groups that I'm familiar with that you're considering, but I know that's not everybody either. I don't want anybody to be left out in terms of there's so many great, diverse groups working in this area, nonprofits and so on.